Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Not A Scooby podcast. Today we are joined by Molly Neill, who is a full-time short-form content editor, which basically means TV ads and online promotional content. That said, she has also worked on, which is surely a career highlight of hers so far. She was the editor on my latest short film, Cattle. So we're going to talk about that film and how, despite my initial idea for the film being that it was going to be 15 minutes long, we ended up cutting it down all the way to 6 minutes. How did that happen, and also why? We also discussed the relationship between a director and editor, who's responsible for what, and as the editor, how do you maybe confront the director when you don't necessarily think their creative decision is what's best for the film, and it maybe doesn't align with how things should be. Molly did a really good job as we worked together of making sure that I was justified in every creative decision that I had. I couldn't simply say to Molly, I want it done this way and I'm not going to explain myself. She put me in a position to make sure that every decision within the whole film was very intentional, which ultimately made the film far better as a result. Finally, Molly also talks about her process and career after graduating. She initially found it quite difficult, and how she's grown over time, constantly learning, and also any advice that she wished she knew sooner that would have helped her on her career trajectory. So if you're a recent graduate or you're someone that's really interested in editing, I do feel like this episode has a great deal of value for you. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy, and thank you for listening. Hi Molly, thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of the Not A Scooby podcast. Let's just jump into my first question. That is, the project we've worked on is Cattle, my short film that took like 8 years now to make. When we wrapped that film, when I was on set, people would ask me, so how long is this film going to be? And I would tell them it would be about 15 minutes, if not longer. And now since your involvement, it was chopped all the way down to 6 minutes, which I think it's a fantastic, powerful 6 minutes.
Okay, great.
Shall we dive into the process of what went wrong in as far as how could people preempt this in pre-production as they're writing a script? Oh, maybe you don't need this scene. Maybe this scene can start later, or this scene can start or end earlier. So let's just talk through the whole editing process of Cattle a bit. How did we get started, and when did we really see the film start to take the shape that it has now?
Yeah, so I think I know I would have spoke to you about this loads at the time, but I always think that the shorter an edit is, the better it is, because it gives you less time to make it bad, if that makes sense. So you've got more opportunity just to say exactly what you want to say as simply as you can say it without adding extra stuff that isn't necessary. And it's funny because you say how can you preempt that in the script? I think that it's better to have stuff that you then find out that you don't need later on, if that makes sense, because you wouldn't know that you don't need it until you get to the edit quite a lot of the time. So if you have all of this stuff, all of this content, all of this media, all these rushes and all of these scenes that you've written, and you've spent so much time writing your script, planning your shots and then shooting them, hopefully all of it will be usable and good and not something that you need to throw away. And then you just find out when you get into the edit and into the nitty gritty of it, you can make decisions. And you and I feel like we went through a journey of making decisions about what the story was about and how best to communicate that. And then based on the decisions that we made then, we knew what could be cut out. But we could have taken a totally different route, and if you'd cut all that out in your script or before you'd started shooting, we would have less options. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's still something to be said about maybe fleshing a scene out a little longer than you maybe anticipated using the edit, just so you have the option. And a big thing on that note is that we certainly used footage, some close-ups of, say, the main character Harry thinking in very different ways that was intended when shooting. Him pacing up and down his sort of farmer shed
Yeah.
we used that in a
Yeah.
very different way than what we intended
Than
to
what
when
was
we were
planned.
filming it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what I mean. Like, so imagine if you'd thought, like, in your script or when you're shooting, like, maybe we don't need that because we're going to change this, or, we're going to go down like a different direction with this scene, which you and I obviously we did end up doing, like creating that montage that wasn't there before and stuff. And if you just decided, like, oh, well, maybe we don't need the pacing up and down because we're going to do this different thing, then we wouldn't have had that. And it came in so handy to use and, like, chop up and create fake time with, like, coming in and out of, like, him pacing and him thinking and Ruth and the boys and all that stuff. So yeah, I think it's good that you have this extra stuff that then we can choose to cut out if we want to.
And it is quite substantial going from, but also this is maybe just my poor prediction, because I think we were running with like a 12-page script, and typically it's a minute a page.
Yeah.
Every page accounts for a minute of screen time. So the estimate probably should have been around 12 minutes.
12 minutes.
That said, we then basically halved the film.
Yeah, totally.
So what were the biggest chunks, if you can remember? Because I know it's been a while since we've actually sat down together and edited this film.
Yeah,
There
I know.
were
I'm trying to
entire
remember.
scenes that we actually chopped out. I think
There
ultimately
was.
the main thing was that they just weren't moving the story forward. I was thinking, particularly early on in the film, there were some scenes where just Harry and Ruth wandered around a bit or arrived back at their farm. And I thought, oh, this is building atmosphere and whatnot. And maybe there's something to be said for that kind of content when you have 2.5 hours with an audience. They are confined to a cinema screen, and frankly, they can't really escape from the scene.
And they've got snacks and stuff, like they're comfortable.
Meanwhile, for short films, for the most part, yes, people are maybe seeing this at film festivals, but also online, maybe on Vimeo, on other websites. It's far easier to just click off. Oh, I've got something better to do than watch this film that I don't even know where it's going. So you were a massive advocate for, as soon as possible in the script or in the film, we need to get to the point of conflict, of the catalyst of the story. We need to get there as soon as possible. Anything before should be trimmed as much as possible.
Yeah, very much so. I feel like you, even if it's not like the turning point or whatever, like rush into that, because I do think that should usually be about halfway through. Yeah, getting to the point of your film, like, so people know what the story is. Do you know, like, what the film is, what it is that they're watching as quickly as possible? Because also, you're right, like, short films kind of exist in this weird space where people aren't necessarily, like, seeking them out. They kind of just come across them and they'll think, okay, well, I'll, like, maybe, like, watch this on Vimeo or I'll watch this on YouTube. And then so it's either that, and you're right, because it's online, people are so used to just, like, scrolling past something that they don't find interesting, so you do have to get their attention. Or the other way that they would consume it, like you were saying, in film festivals, they're sitting maybe watching, like, if it's a bunch of short films, you're maybe one of like 20, 30, 40, 50 short films that they've seen that day, and that can get, like, really, like, quite, like, fatiguing, like sitting and watching a million short films, and there's no way you're going to remember all of them. So if one starts and you don't really know what's going on in the first, like, couple minutes, you're not sure, like, what the tone is, what the story is, what it is that you're in for, you might just, like, completely zone out because you're going to watch, like, a million others, so why'd you have to pay attention to this? Or you might just leave and come back and, like people do at film festivals, be like, okay, well, I'll leave and go to the bathroom, or, like, go and get, like, some lunch, and then I'll come back. Like, you want to do something really quick that makes them want to stay and watch it, that gets their attention. And I feel like we managed to do that, like, quite well in Carol, just, like, get into what's going on. Like, we get to the kids arriving, like, the start of the conflict, like, dead quick. And I think originally, there was lots of more just, like, establishing that they're on a farm, and that, like, the location. But as soon as you see the farm, you know they're on a farm. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think you're right about the main dramatic scene does not need to happen as soon as possible. But the way you phrased it, as people need to know what they're in for. So as much as so much of Cattle is these conversations, these disagreements, it really doesn't kick off until about 4 minutes in, and everything just goes haywire.
Yeah.
But for those initial 4 minutes, it's various conversations and tension is building. But very early on, the second that Harry speaks to the teenagers, we are establishing the theme of this film, that about, standing up for yourself, or like being a man and what that means, and the
Yeah.
expectation on people to behave in a certain way, particularly within age groups and
Yes.
hierarchies, and how that sort of gets disrupted. And obviously teenagers don't like to be patronized by adults, and how sort of intimidating that can be. So we established all of that very early on, within, say, the first 90 seconds, as much as we didn't then put a sledgehammer through the whole until later on.
Yeah.
Just setting that scene of, okay, you understand what the story is. The story is about interpersonal relationships and hierarchies and dynamics between different people and choosing sides. This is where we are.
Yeah.
Let's move on. And then we went from there.
Yeah.
So with pacing, the pace of this whole film is pretty full on.
Yeah.
Given that it's 6 minutes, once the wheels start turning, it's kind of all steam ahead, and it just keeps going up and up and up, and the drama just keeps building into the very end. And then even when you think the film's over and it's like fading to black, nope, there's another scene. To leave you on even a worse note potentially than you thought.
Oh my god, yeah, it really is. It is.
So why is that important? Why is it important to maintain that pacing, not necessarily having a really long scene followed by a really short scene followed by another really long one? Why is it important to have a degree of consistency and continuity throughout the film?
Yeah, so I think that with Cattle particularly, and most short films, you're wanting, and I think maybe this can maybe be extended to like just all films in general, but you're wanting stuff to continuously happen. Do you know what I mean? Like, you want people to be experiencing new thoughts and new feelings and new, like, I don't know, like interpretations about what's going on every time you show something new. Do you know what I mean? Or every time you sort of like, you could say like every shot, like every time you cut to a different shot, like what's this shot saying? Every time you cut to a different scene, like what's this scene about? Like, it can't be what the previous scene had already said. And also to do with shots, although that's like in a much more vague sense, because obviously you still need like shot, reverse shot and things like that. It should be taking you to like a different understanding of the story every single time. So I think with pacing, like, I still find pacing quite tricky. I think that's something that you maybe just like continuously develop like throughout the time that you work, like throughout your working life. But I think that as long as things are moving, then you're sort of on the right path. And that can mean like maybe you do have like in terms of the actual pace of like cut, like how quick are your cuts, you could like slow it down like from one scene to the next and say, okay, well in this scene it's slowed down because like our characters have slowed down or the situation's slowed down. And then when you get to the next scene and maybe it does like pick up again, it's because like what they're going through has picked up and it is speeding up. But I don't think that should ever halt the new information that's coming. Do you know what I mean? So even if the next scene is going to be really slow paced, it has to be slow paced for a reason. And the way that you like present that has to be like, okay, I'm now telling you, the audience, that we're slowing this down because this is how they're feeling. This person is slowing down, this situation is slowing down. But if it's just slowed down for the sake of it, then I feel like it's a halt in the story, and it's a chance for someone to say, I don't care anymore. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's quite interesting then reflecting on Cattle again. I'm trying to avoid not patting ourselves on the back too much and being like, Cattle is this pinnacle of editing. Yeah, this masterpiece, flawless. Everyone should analyze it. No. I'm trying to avoid doing that, but I also think it's important to highlight the good aspects. For example, as you said, the actual pacing of cut does change throughout the film. At the start, scenes are almost played out in one shot.
Yeah.
Characters move in, they move out, and then I think to a certain extent, this is maybe retrospect in 2020, but at the start of the film, scenes are played out in one shot as the characters feel like they have control. The less control the characters feel like they have, the more chaotic the editing becomes. And we're chopping all over the place as the scenes getting taken out of the main character's hands and they feel like they've got less of a grasp on things. And then when they, again, towards the end of the film, maybe when they feel like they've got more control over the situation because of sequences that happen in the film, it slows down again. But despite it mirroring the start of the film, it feels very different because of everything that's now happened in the story.
It's true. And then, like you're saying, it matches perfectly with that idea that then the last sequence of the film is like the choppiest. You know, it's like, and that's when you're like, okay, nobody actually has control and this is a terrible situation, which I think makes so much sense because you're obviously, the first time you spoke to me about it, you were like, it's all about like masculinity and like toxic masculinity, but also like masculinity in general, and like that like struggle and what it means to be a man and to be a boy and all this stuff. And then I feel like that's an important note to end on, to be like, actually this is scary and is a problem and it is out of your hands. Like, even though you can feel like maybe you've got control, you actually don't. So it works really well with what you were trying to say, I think, anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a massive theme of hierarchy within relationships, particularly, even though they're not their direct parents, they're their seniors, so they expect to have a level of control. And teenagers, particularly young people in general, are often pushing back against that. I recently saw the Bob Dylan biopic, which makes me think of the line, your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. And I think it's this expectation that they think, I can go up to them, I can tell them what to do, and they're going to listen to me. And the exact opposite happens in reality. If you go up to a group of teenagers, they're like, you have zero control over me, and I'm going to prove it. So another thing we did a lot within the film was we had scenes. We removed a few scenes. They just got immediately chopped entirely. Other scenes got trimmed down. And it was often not the middle section. It was often, what point in this scene should we enter? And what point in this scene should we exit? And I thought that was very interesting. That helped really build tension, because sometimes we were leaving scenes before discussion has really been concluded. So it then left a massive question mark over things. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think like talking about like the conversations within scenes, like things that were happening between characters, their interactions, because the whole film is like a conversation, really, like, and not like a literal conversation, but you're communicating something and it is sort of like its own thing, it's one thing. It wouldn't really make sense to like conclude, start again, conclude, start again, conclude, start again. I think they all kind of bleed into each other as like one continuous, like, this was the thing that incited this incident, then we go through it and then it ends, rather than being like there's all these little mini incidents within the 6 minutes, because like we just don't have time for that. And I also think that would then take away from feeling like, from the whole thing, like from feeling like it is one whole thing and you've just experienced one whole conversation or like incident. But yeah, for coming in and out of the scenes literally individually, when you're, because I've not written a script since I was a teenager, so I have no idea like what that's like anymore, to write scripts or to shoot things. Like, I'm so like far removed from what that process is like now, like to literally do it, have experience of it other than just listening to people talk about it. But I think that, I imagine that in order to write a story, you have to like place yourself in a situation and then be like, okay, this bit makes sense, this sequence makes sense, this sequence makes sense. And then in the edit, you don't need that, because your audience is able to understand what's going on without having constant little introductions to the situation. So yeah, like I feel like to shoot a scene, it's important to say, okay, we're going to establish where everybody is, we're going to establish what's going on at the start, then we're going to have the point of the scene, and then we're going to finish it and establish where people are at the end. And I think that makes sense to do, and I think you should do that, because again, like, I think coverage is so important to give you options, because it's better to have too much coverage than not enough coverage. But then when you're actually looking at it as a finished like video clip beside another video clip beside another video clip, you don't need these little introductory parts. Like, people, the audience can see what's going on, they can put it together from like how the last scene ended to how this one's starting, like who's where and what's happened. And again, it's just like a matter of like, are you wasting time by introducing this space again? Or are you giving people an opportunity to be like, okay, I'm tuning out because I don't care, I don't need to know this. Do you know what I mean? Like, I already know that we're on a farm. I already know, like, I think like with Harry and Ruth as well, it's like as soon as they start speaking, you're like, okay, that's his wife or his partner. Do you know, like, you know that you don't need these little introductory bits. They just kind of slow it down. Yeah, so that's why I think about that.
And I think that boils down to treating your audience with respect. and trusting that they are capable of realizing that 2 + 2 = 4. You don't have to give them the whole equation.
Exactly.
And they can put those pieces together. They can tell if this relationship's brand new or these people know each other just by whether it's music or it's the way in which its performance is. But there's so much you can do in the edit to craft that.
For sure. And yeah, it's about like having respect for them and knowing that they'll work that out. And I also think maybe there's like an element of, is that what's engaging as well? Like, you don't ever want things to be confusing. Like, things certainly shouldn't be confusing, because then that's another way that you lose people. But also, is that engaging for them to be like, okay, you're not telling me, hello, this is Ruth, this is Harry's wife. Their brain is working and being like, okay, well, I know this because I'm interacting with this film that I'm watching. Do you know what I mean? It's not just like a passive, like I'm just sitting and absorbing it. It's like they're interacting with it because they're putting 2 and 2 together, like you said. So.
There was a really interesting video essay I saw recently from Cine Sticks, is a YouTube channel, and they made a case for the Bourne Identity trilogy having removing all of the exposition. So you don't know that he's got memory loss.
Oh, right, yeah.
They remove all of that, and it's just about you then putting that together. Anything that's expositional of Matt Damon saying, I've got memory loss, job it. And people will figure that out themselves. More so like Memento, I'd argue.
Okay, yeah.
That after about 20 minutes of watching Memento by Christopher Nolan, starring Guy Pearce.
Yes. I was like, it's a guy. I was like, which guy is it?
It's a guy. So, starring Guy Pearce, Memento, after about 10 minutes or so, you realize, oh, this is going backwards. Every scene's ending, but that's never spelled out. There's not a massive block of text at the beginning from Christopher Nolan saying, this film is in reverse.
Yeah.
And no one ever says, because obviously they don't know, that's not the characters are aware. Yeah, but he just leaves the audience to figure out, oh yeah, when he goes to the hotel desk, you remember this guy and you remember this sentence because this is how the last scene ended or began. It even confuses me. Christopher Nolan did a whole YouTube video with a whiteboard. He showcases how it all ties together. Yeah, maybe Christopher Nolan's a perfect example of that level of engagement. Really, sometimes I think it's maybe too hard work. Tenet.
Oh god, so I've not seen Tenet, but yeah, like, so even with Memento, like, there is an argument for like that is too much hard work, but people love it and it's like a classic and it's so successful and it's like a beloved film, and that's probably a big part of it because people were like, I interacted with this film, I was brought on my own journey with this film about at what point I realised what was going on and how I realised what was going on because it was personal to me, do you know, rather than it being like, yeah, everybody knows because it told you everybody the same way. So I think, there's like balance, absolutely. Maybe.
And I think that's why everyone loves a whodunit, because you're given the opportunity to actually make a guess. And again, Christopher Nolan with The Prestige.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we can spoil these films. They've been up for donkeys.
I know.
But there's a big twist in that film, and if you rewatch it or you watch a video essay on all the twists, turns, and how we should have been able to tell, there's so many examples of, why didn't I catch that? Shutter Island. I studied this in higher media studies for a year. We spent an entire year studying this film because there's so much content to go through. How could you tell that he was the patient? That's what we did for a year. You can't do that with Saltburn.
No, you can't. And like, I know, I hope that it's not like a big spoiler. It is a spoiler for Saltburn, but I also hope that people have seen it. But no, I know you can't do it for Saltburn, and it takes something out of it, and it also makes the end so, I think it's so silly, but then I sort of like get to change my perspective and be like, okay, this movie is really silly and that's fun. Like, so there was like an element of that for me where I was like, okay, I can rewatch it with this in my head of like, this is just a silly fun movie, and it is that. But at the same time, you're like, you could have also made it that as if you had that plan all along, rather than it seeming like you just changed your mind, like the film changes its mind at the end about what's happened the whole time. I think it takes you out of it and it makes you feel like the world isn't real anymore.
Absolutely. So I think the lesson learned from that is that setup and payoff is required. If you're going to have a twist in your film, that needs to be set up early on. Say, for example, in Cattle, we have And we also didn't get that coverage on set, which we should have, being that the shotgun plays quite a big part in the film.
Yeah.
Bruce is initially holding it, hands it off to Harry, and then we actually, in post, cut into a tighter shot of the
Yes.
gun to really have the audience put more emphasis on, we're not trying to spoon feed you, but pay attention to this gun.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And then it also felt necessary that, I think this is Chekhov's gun, the concept of if you show a gun, the gun needs to go off at some point.
Yes.
You
Yeah,
can't show a gun and it not go off. So then we
yeah.
get to the end of the film and I'm like, oh, technically the gun's gone off. It's gone off. Who cares if I spoil Cal? But the gun goes off, but it's not used in the way that a gun would theoretically be used. So
No.
then
It's not what you're thinking is maybe going to happen. Like, yeah.
Yeah, so then we change things so that it does still go off in the way that you would expect the gun to be used. So then I feel like there's an element of we've set up the gun and we fulfilled that promise to the audience that it is going to be used. Yeah. So moving on, collaboration between a director and an editor. What is, because I think it's important to identify the delegation of tasks. What is the role of an editor in that relationship? Because it's very easy to become a bit of a yes man and just, okay, the director wants to make a change or they have a creative choice, just do it to avoid the potential conflict and confrontation.
Yeah.
You didn't necessarily take that route. in the
I
best
hope I
way.
was nice about it.
No, you were, but
Okay, good.
the main thing that, and I've spoken very highly of you since
Thank you,
being
Jack.
that it's like, you're very welcome, is that you made me justify all my creative decisions. I couldn't just say, I want us to do this with the film because I want to. And that's it. And it's just my mind's eye is telling us to go in this direction. You're like, yeah, but why? And you would really sort of poke and prod. Oh, why do we need to keep the scene? Why can't we just leave this on the cutting room floor? And my honest reaction is just, well, we spent 6 hours getting that scene. We're not just going to chop it.
Yeah.
You know, people will be livid. Someone's going to take my head off if they found out I asked them to do this for 6 hours and it's not even in the film.
Yeah, it's true.
So you made me justify all that. And I think ultimately the film is far better for, obviously, your contribution and the fact that it is 6 minutes. It's not this 12-minute slow-paced, No Country for Old Men kind of film that I initially had anticipated. So why do you find that it's important? And what is your responsibility within the edit? Not only to press the buttons, but also creatively.
Yeah. So see you saying press the buttons, like that's the phrase that comes to my head a lot. I'm so glad that you think the film is better for that. Like that's really big relief, you know, because it's really easy to like sort of doubt yourself. But that's again like one of the conversations I had to have with myself when we were going through the edit was I was like, no, you're actually doing like a disservice to you and to the film by not saying what your perception of it is. And I think like with collaboration, I think it's so collaborative. All of film, but just video production in general, is so collaborative. You can do it alone, but those are really weird, special, like strange, unique films that are done with one person. But generally, like you need so many people and you need so many people's perspectives and their contributions to make it like as good as it can be, because you're coming at it from like your experience and your knowledge as someone, as a writer and a director. And that's a totally different skill set than somebody who is like the DOP or the editor or like the sound recorder, so the sound designer. Like it's like a completely different skill set, and you can't expect one person to be so talented and so experienced in all of these skill sets. And so by taking in people who have these individual sort of, what you call that, like niches or whatever, like their section of filmmaking that is special to them and comes naturally to them and is what they're interested in, sort of by combining everybody's passion and everybody's talent, you're just going to get like a better product at the end than if it's just one person. And so I think with me, it's like I'm coming at the film from a completely different perspective than you are. I wasn't on set. I'd never met the actors. Do you know, like I'm not caught up in the reality of what it was like to shoot it. I get like the very privileged chance to just see it for what it is and see it for the media that you have created, like what you've given to me. Like that's all the film is to me, is what you've actually shot. It's not all these sort of like interpersonal relationships or these like, you knowing how difficult it was to get a shot and how long it took and how much effort you put into it, which is beneficial because then it's like, okay, we're just dealing with what actually exists. We're not dealing with all this extra stuff that an audience isn't going to see and that they're not going to get to understand or perceive. They're just going to understand what you're giving to them. So I think it's important to sort of keep that in mind. And I think that with you and I, because you were so open to it being a collaborative process and like so open to what other people think and what other people's opinions are, while still obviously having your own, you've got like a solid vision and a solid idea for what you want, but you're not going to just like say, like disregard anybody else's opinion. That was like quite an easy process. It was more like between you and I, like I never felt like I brought anything to it and you were immediately like, no, and I shan't give you a reason because I don't want to. Do you know, like you're really like open to talking more about it. And I also hope that like for me, like I just love film and TV and I love like consuming it as an audience member and I love thinking about it and analysing it. And I think that you and I got the chance to, during our collaboration, to analyse the film as we were making it and realise more about what it's about and how we can then like present that and communicate that better once we'd worked out what it's about more specifically. That's like the funnest part to me and like the bit that makes it enjoyable and the thing that I want to do, because I find that so like satisfying and fun and interesting. And so yeah, I think like in terms of collaboration, it's always about remembering that everybody has like a valid, or not everybody has a valid because it's not always valid, but like that you should consider everybody's input and think about try and work out if you believe it to be valid or not. Because there was loads of times that there was stuff I suggested that wasn't right for it or that wasn't correct. Like the way we start with the shots, I wanted to like cut that down even more. But looking at the film as it is now, they're really good and they're nice and they are necessary. And I like that we get loads of shots of the animals because that's also really important, like for the payoff at the end of the film as well. You have to see those establishing shots of the farm and of the cows and of the sheep and things like that. So they are important. And I feel like if I had just went in and I was like, well, I think this and I'm not going to listen to you, I would have been like, I think that we should maybe cut them down even more, but you didn't want to, and that made the film better as well. So yeah, I think that's why collaboration is so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did.
Okay, good.
I think the point you made about your coming at the film from an outside perspective, you don't have all these experiences and the unconscious biases of myself. For example, we record these scenes. Not only did they take a long time, but I'm partially sitting there thinking, that actor in that scene, that's maybe one of their only scenes in the film. And if we cut that, they won't be happy. And they won't be happy with me. So me and their relationship might be tainted. Scenes removed. Well, you're thinking, I have no relationship with that person, so get it out of here. Well, I'm like, no. But it's interesting because our priorities are totally different as well. Another example is if you're a director that also operates the camera. There's some shots in the film that maybe there's soft focus or there's some technical hiccup. But since our priorities weren't, I need to look my best as a camera operator, we were just thinking story first, first above everything else.
Absolutely.
Meanwhile, if I was camera operating or if I was focus pulling and we pull up a shot, performance is fantastic, but it's slightly soft, I'm going to think, that makes me look bad. So we've got to find something else. And that's absolutely not to throw shade at any of the camera department. The camera department are great. Thank you, Amy.
Fantastic. Very, very good. Very, very good. Everyone was great, but it's if I'm going to substitute something, if it's going to be performance or a technical perfection, I'm going to choose the performance. The performance. Absolutely. And I think that's really important, and that's where your priorities, in terms of like what I've always been taught and in my experience as well as what other people have told me, that's always the highest priority, obviously, is like the story and making sure that you're communicating your story and you're expressing your story and that the audience is going to understand your story. That's like the most important thing. And it makes total sense if you're if you're a DOP and you are like the most technically like beautiful, like technically proficient shot is gone, and you've spent this time and that's your art, do you know? It's like that's something that you've created and you care about. It is awful to think that then it would be gone, but unfortunately, not unfortunately, it is fortunately, I suppose what you're looking for is to have that beautiful shot with the story being communicated the best it possibly can be at the same time. And yeah, because having like you were saying, having a shot where the performance is amazing and maybe the camera isn't perfect, that's still going to affect people, and that's still going to be a much more useful or like impactful shot than one where the performance isn't that good or the story isn't being communicated very well, but the camera looks fantastic. Like that's not gonna help like the film overall, do you know what I mean? Or not as well anyway, but I suppose what you're wanting is both at the same time if you can.
Yeah, exactly, if you can.
Yeah.
And I think another point about the justification of everything, there's something that you feel like, is this required? And I feel like often that was our process of you saying, do we need this? And if I didn't have a justification, okay, well now let's consider, how does this look without that thing in it? Other times there was actually justification. One big example is with the teenagers, is that they're supposed to be horrible and insensitive and lack any sort of empathy to anyone else, as teenagers often are.
As they are, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, teenagers can say some very hurtful things.
Yeah,
and
it's not inaccurate. Like it is. I feel like in your memory, my memory, most of that is what it's like.
So then, with that, there was a lot of improvisation with the teenage characters, particularly with insults, particularly towards Ruth.
Yes.
And because of that improvisation, there was a lot of times where an insult, and I obviously just said, "Guys, go wild! Like I'm not going to judge you.
Yeah.
Like you're like." Really
go for it.
Yeah, literally just whatever comes to mind in like the dark corners of what kind of you might want to throw at Ruth right now. Do it. But then we get to the edit and you're like, do we need these insults? Like what are they actually achieving? I was like, you're right, let's chop these ones. And then you're like, cow. They keep calling her a cow. And like, calm your tits, you stupid cow.
Yeah.
Why do they keep calling her a cow? Are these necessary? I'm like, well, yeah, because from my teenage brain logic, I'm thinking, insult her as a cow. Okay, thinking about cows. See a cow. Oh, that cow now represents the old wifey that we don't like.
Yeah.
Let's go take our anger out on the literal cow.
Yeah.
So then those lines then stayed because there was a through line there and there was clear intention and purpose for those lines to remain. So I think that was a good process that we went through, of everything had to be justified and anything that wasn't essential just got cut.
I think also the thing about the cow insult, that's one of my favourite things about the whole film, to be honest, is like, because it just makes it, like you're saying, it just ties it all together so well. And it's a way of, again, like you're expressing like their thought process without literally saying it. Like it's enough just that they've been calling her a cow this whole time. It is about like how they feel as boys, like as like young men, like sort of confronting this like older man and this older woman, and and just the way they interact with each other, like it ties it all together really, really well. And you then feel like, okay, well, I know why they've killed this cow. I know why their anger is like all the way up here and why their violence is all the way up here, because it's not about the cow, it's about Ruth and it's about Harry, like it's about them, and it ties it together so that makes sense. And also I feel like it just sits like the theme about identifying like what's necessary. The fact that we were then able to like have that conversation, you could physically express to me like, no, this is why this is necessary. And then because you could express that to me, then you and I could be like, okay, well, how do we make that like even more obvious? Like now that this is like, we know that this is the exact reason that this has to be in the film, how do we like promote that reason more? Do you know? And I think that's also then why we like brought in more of the cows and like cutting away to cows at different points and stuff. So again, like that just like improves the film, I think, improves the telling of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a viewer, which I somewhat hope, people are watching the film being like, why do we keep cutting back to these cows? Like
Yeah.
every establishing shot, this farm is cows. It's like, yeah, I get it. There's cows on the farm. Thank you very much. Film's called Cattle. Like, yeah, right,
Yeah.
okay. And I want someone to kind of be sitting on the edge of their seat, being like, this is really stupid.
Yeah.
Could we not see anything else?
Yeah.
And then they're like, okay.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
it makes sense.
I want that. Hopefully, I want that to be the sort of process that people are going through.
Yeah,
So,
and even if it's not like, sorry.
No, go on.
Talk shit. Even if it's not like as literal as that, it should hopefully be doing something in people's minds without them. Maybe even if they're not like actively interrogating it like that, it could still maybe be like going on with what they're seeing. Like it's going through their brain without them realizing maybe. But anyway. Yeah.
So beyond that, beyond being open-minded and willing to, I suppose, bend your creative vision as a director and see things from other people's perspectives, is there anything else that a director can do to make editors happy, whether that be on set or that be in the post-production process? How can people on set make the life of an editor easier?
Okay, I think I've probably like said it too much, but like knowing that it is collaborative, that's really helpful, and perceiving you as like a fellow collaborator makes me very happy personally, to feel like I'm getting to contribute to this film and it's my contribution. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm getting to add something that hopefully makes it better. I find that really fulfilling. So that makes me happy, treating it like it's a collaborative process. On set, like I said already, but because I talk about it so much, but just like coverage, like getting as much coverage as possible, having as many options as possible. And it's so funny because my partner is a first AD and he has like the total opposite like priority. So he's always like, and me and him have talked about that, but he's always like, he was like, if we can cut out scenes before we shoot, that just is so much better. And why are we taking forever to film this shot that we're probably not even going to use? Like, blah, blah, blah. Like, he's like, hurry up, like, keep it on time. And whereas I'm like the opposite, and I'm like, no, you should always have that. You should always shoot as much as you can. So then we've got we've got options in terms of the coverage. I mean, like shooting as much as you can coverage wise. So that then if we decide, actually, we are going to try and portray this character in this way, it's easier if we've got more options to do that, because we did that a few times. I think, like, maybe be like, how are we going to portray, like, maybe Ruth, like, how are we going to, like, try and get her to come across, like, we've sort of I've decided to go down this route where she's more like this, where she's maybe a bit more firm, but she's not, like, screaming at him unfairly. You don't feel like she's being unfair, you're understanding her anger. And it's like, how are we going to do that? Because, like, some of her performance maybe doesn't match that, and some of it does, but the more options we have, the easier it is for us to then, like, create that in the edit. Or, like, during the montage with the boys all talking to each other, and it's intercut with Harry and Ruth having their argument, there was enough there to create, like, a little narrative of one of the boys sort of feeling, who's the most vocal, I think, who isn't Connor, him and Connor having a sort of, like, little, like, not rivalry, but how they're interacting with each other. You can sort of create, like, a little narrative there that wasn't in the script, it was just in the performance and them talking. And if you hadn't, like, ran that shot for as long and let them, like, just, like, improv for as long as they were able to, you maybe wouldn't have got that and had the chance to then explore that as something that's going on as well. So yeah, I think just, like, for me personally, it's cut as much coverage as you can, and then also, yeah, like, have be open to collaboration, but like you're saying, because I'm definitely not right all the time, and I'm just, like, an additional voice that doesn't know as much about the story as you do, because it is your story. I think at the same time as being open to collaboration, definitely come in with, like, I know what this is and I know what I'm trying to do, and you're open to different ways to achieve that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool.
And I can't really put a finger on how long it took us to get to a picture lock, but it was quite a while, time period wise. So how
we had
important?
big gaps in between as well.
Yeah, but how important is it to take that time to sit on it and just to process it? Because often, particularly when we took the film in a direction that wasn't aligned with my initial thinking, I often then needed time to sit with it and just to process how this then plays out. Because I'm so guilty of every single film I make, I'll initially see it and I'll be like, oh, geez, this is terrible. Absolute garbage. Every single film, grad film, same thing happened. Cattle, same thing happened. Be like, this isn't the film I envisioned. But the problem is when I'm writing a script, I'm imagining it in CinemaScope on the nicest light, you know, unlimited production budget.
Yeah.
That's what I see in my head. And then we show up, and then it's like, I want to move that wind turbine. It's like, that's not going to happen. All right, fair enough. So then reality kicks in. So I need some time just to come back down to earth, basically, and realize it's not the film I thought. But then as I sit with it longer and longer, I then do come to terms with it. Often I don't watch something for a month. Very much happened with Cattle. Hadn't seen it maybe for a month. Come back to it, and then I'm like, hey, this is actually really solid. And I don't. And the main thing is I don't miss. And probably a massive important part of it is that I don't even remember what my initial vision was for the film. I just have now what we have, and I'm like, this actually feels really entertaining. So, how important is it, to make a long question even longer? How important is it to take some time away? Not rush things. You're not making social media content where it has to be out in 2 days. Sure, maybe you do have deadlines, but the deadline shouldn't be really short turnaround. How important is it to take that time to sit with things, to process it, take some time away from the film, come back, and then view it with a fresh pair of eyes?
Yeah, so there's you have to have a balance with taking a break. So I think that for me, I have the exact same experience as you, where wherever I edit something or work on something, I always, like, as soon as the job's finished, I'm like, oh man, I don't know how good that is. I don't know how well a job I did. Like, it's still just so fresh in your head that you're like, you are still in that phase of, there's a million other things we could do. There's a million other options, because you could just edit a film like forever, like continuously, and change it infinitely, and that's not helpful for anybody and not practical. So I think that right when you finish it, you're still in that headspace of, but then maybe we should have done this, and maybe we should have done that, and there's this other option that we maybe should have done too. But then when you take a big break from it and you forget all of that, then you get to consume it as somebody, not quite as somebody who's new to the footage and new to the film, new to the story, but you get to come back and see it as somebody who's like, I'm now seeing this for what it is, and then you can appreciate it, I think. Or, you can see, like, maybe this doesn't work and I didn't realise that didn't work because I was so caught up in it at the time. So you can come back and you can say, like, okay, you can get a much clearer vision of what it is that you've got, what, like, the end product is, and what is literally being shown, rather than all this extra stuff that exists, like the other pages of the script, other lines of dialogue, other different shots, other performances, like all that can sort of get removed. So I think that's maybe why, because you get that sort of doubt taken away from you a wee bit with a break. But then also a break is important in the editing process, because like you were saying, you can come back to something after not watching it for like a month and then say, okay, well, actually this bit, it isn't really working, or this bit doesn't really make sense, or this bit isn't like communicating what we wanted to communicate, and I was so lost in everything else while we were editing that I wasn't able to see that. So having the break helps you get a wee bit of a clearer vision. But also it's important to get something done, because like I was saying, you can just sit and edit it into like oblivion until it's something completely different, and then you can even like be cyclical, where like you'll edit something and then it becomes this other thing, and then it just ends up going back to like before. So like the quality can decrease too if you keep on like going at it when you should maybe stop. So I think that's like kind of a strange balance that you need to figure out per project, like per individual project, where the limit is, and where you're like, okay, we've got this to the best it can be. It's not going to be helpful to keep on editing and changing and moving stuff around anymore, because now we've got it to a place where this is what we all want it to be, and it's what you want it to be, and it's and you're happy. So
Do you feel like there's a niche, a community for every style of, whether it's video editing or just video in general? Say there is obviously very much an audience for more raw style content, while equally maybe a polar opposite would be this recent A Complete Unknown Bob Dylan biopic. Is people have asked me, do you recommend it? I'm like, well, do you like Bob Dylan? Because do you feel like there's a community and an audience for any kind of story?
Yes, I do. I think, like, so although I can sit and talk shit about Marvel films, you can't deny that people love it, and so many people love it, and it makes so many people happy and gives them exactly what they want. So, but I do think that there is, like, there's an audience for probably nearly everything, and maybe it's about trying to, I don't know, because I have no idea what it's like to work on like big, huge feature films like that. But maybe part of that process is like identifying like who are you speaking to? Like, you're not speaking to everybody, so who are you speaking to? Who are you trying to affect? And maybe for A Complete Unknown, it's like you're wanting to speak to Bob Dylan fans, or you're wanting to speak to people who might become Bob Dylan fans, like fans of the music, rather than people who don't like him and like don't want to listen to it. They're not your audience. So maybe like when things are a bit maybe that's part of that process, is like, because obviously like you and I are still learning as well, like we're still quite young, like relatively young, and like in that journey of like figuring out how to make things well. So maybe that's like another learning process, is like figuring out, okay, who am I speaking to specifically? I'm not just like throwing stuff out to everybody, because there's no way there's no way you could ever make something that everybody likes, or that speaks to everybody. So that's quite interesting to think about that, because I do think that there are audiences for everything.
Yeah, well, recently, say David Lynch, rest in peace.
R.I.P.
But say his films, I think, are a really good example of, like, I've watched a fair amount of David Lynch films.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a fan of any of them.
Yeah.
I enjoy sequences, and I'm like, oh, this film's really getting started. Mulholland Drive. There's a few scenes in that where there's a moment the film director meets the main character, and they have like a sort of a meet cute look at each other. I'm like, the film's starting now.
Yeah.
Like, it's gonna be a rom-com. And then that doesn't get addressed, and we're moving on. And now, we're doing something crazy. Yeah. I've watched a fair amount of David Lynch films. I actually preferred him I preferred him in interviews. I thought he was very interesting. Him speaking about meditation or the weather.
Yeah, I love him. Yeah.
I enjoyed that more than the actual films he was making. But I think that's a perfect example of, he also got the budgets that he wanted, more or less. I know he often had a difficult time in productions. But it's so out of the box. It's so not your standard kind of production. So I do think it proves that there is an audience. And it's not like David Lynch was a small director. Like, he was... Oh my
God, no, like one of the biggest ever, yeah.
So going back to the role of an editor, do you feel like you, as an individual, have a creative style, an editing style? Or is the role of an editor to be a bit of a chameleon and be able to fit the brief? Because as we've gone to say it's a collaboration, do you feel like you need to sort of fit the mold that has been set? Or do you come in and be like, no, this is how I cut things. Take it or leave it.
Definitely not the second one. Like, this is how I cut things. No, because I feel like everything probably should be cut a different way. And no, I think the first option is definitely, that sounds more right to me, to be like, well, no, we're looking at like this project for what this project is. It's not about anything else. And what method of, I don't know, like what pace, whatever, how is that gonna, what will best serve like this specific project? So no, I think you should always like tailor it to what you're working on. I wouldn't even know how to like try and replicate like a way of working from something like, like an ad to a short film or something. I don't know if you can. So no, I think that it is about like fitting what you're doing around the specific project.
And I think that goes for a lot of different roles. Roger Deakins, the cinematographer, has said that a lot, being that he probably has every right to have his own visual style and to tell people, this is how I shoot things, and that's how it is,
Yeah,
because he's
yeah,
so sought after.
yeah.
But his whole thought process is the exact same as yourself, being that he's like, no, it's whatever's best for the project. Not every project needs to look the same as Prisoners or 1917. It really depends on what that film itself requires. And his role is to match that intention, that demand, instead of
Well, if he's
forcing
saying
things.
that, that makes me feel much more validated.
Yeah.
I'm like, if he says it, then it must be true. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that does like, doesn't that make sense though? Like for that to be the case.
Absolutely. So, AI video
Okay.
editing. Shall we dive into this? Speaking off screen, me and Molly did say that we very much don't want to be like fear mongers among creatives. I understand it's a very intimidating, scary, but also exciting time within the creative industry. I know the film and TV industry in the UK in general isn't as healthy as it has been in the past. So very much not trying to stress people out. I think it's also important to get everyone's nuanced opinions. This is one of those things that's very much on the bingo card for the Not A
Oh
Scooby
yeah.
podcast, is I bring up AI time because people have very nuanced opinions about it. And
Yeah.
a lot of people think about different things. For example, Claire Gould, and who's the wildlife camera operator, camera assistant, as well as Viola, who is a visual creative. They're both very, in their personal lives, focused on sustainability. So the second I bring up AI, they're like, oh, well, the amount of water that it consumes to actually to keep the GPUs.
I don't know. I've also heard that it's really bad for the environment, and I just trust that. I don't know how, but
Same. I'm like, I can fully imagine that it's terrible for the environment.
yeah.
So
And like people smarter than me are telling me that it is, so I
yeah,
believe
I'm,
them.
I'm, yeah, I'm not going to have an opinion. Like, I'm like, yeah, sure, 100%, it makes sense. So, how do you feel about it? We spoke off screen about, yeah, even in the software that we're using now, Descript, to edit this
Yeah.
podcast,
Yeah.
it's getting very good at very simple editing, removing gaps, removing filler words. You can even do a multicam effect where
Crazy.
a simple line of code basically just cuts to whoever's speaking,
Crazy.
and it does that automatically. So we've been speaking about how, not so maybe with ourselves being that we've got more experience, but certainly entry level positions as an editor. How do you feel like that's going to potentially affect those roles? Also, do you embrace it in your workflow, or are you totally rejecting it at every corner?
So I'm not rejecting it because I think there are people, again, people who are much more experienced than me and I look up to, have that attitude of you don't reject developments, like you have to kind of roll with it in order to keep your work relevant and keep you being relevant and up to date with like just what industry practice is. So I think that's important. But at the same time, it does make me nervous because I actually nearly did a job last year where, and I can't remember if I've told you this, Jack, before, but somebody asked me to like do a rough cut with AI, and I was like, that's the first time anybody had ever asked me to do that, like, you know, and it was like an app that would cut it like to make like an assembly, and I was like, I don't really want to do that because I'm like, it takes away the chance for me to look through all the footage, know what, like get familiar with all of it, know what all the shots are and what like everything that we have. And that's like, yeah, if AI does that, then I'm not getting the chance to, it's like robbing me of that familiarity with the media. So I think it was bad for that reason. But then I would embrace it for things like transcripts. Like, so if something's like a really long interviews or if it's like a documentary, like transcription is AI as well. So there's like these types of different uses that are just really beneficial and helpful and save you a lot of time and effort, like than sitting. I mean, I don't know, like you will probably had to transcribe something at some point. It takes so long, and it's not like the time you put into it, it doesn't feel worth it, but it is. You need it, like you need a transcript. So I think like AI for situations like that is really useful and will only like help people do their jobs easier, and hopefully like give them more time to spend time on the fun parts, like the creative parts. So hopefully it should take over like the boring tasks. But then, like you were saying, and like we were saying before, and I'm actually stealing this from somebody who I met who was like a telly producer, and this was his like thought. This was what he was thinking about. It was, he was like, assistant roles, if they're taken over, then how are you going to progress to the next stage of your career? So an assistant editor, a lot of their job isn't, a lot of it, actually some of it is creative, but like a lot of it is like organization and assemblies. That's something that theoretically like AI could probably do, and there's like drawbacks from that, because you're obviously, it's always better to have a person like have the understand the nuances of things, and you know, like have an actual human do the work, to just because you kind of have more context for what's going on, than trusting something else. But yeah, if that gets taken over, then like how's an assistant editor, how's anybody ever going to get, if that job is gone, then people would recommend traditionally that you are assistant editor before you're an editor. And some people don't do that. Some people are just assistant editors and that's their career. But a lot of people, it's like that's like one of the stepping stones. That's one of their like the rungs on the ladder or whatever. So it's just like robbing people of opportunities for experience. And yeah, like that whole traditional idea that you start off in like an assistant job, not even like an assistant editor, like an edit assistant, and then you sort of like work your way up in a company. I think that's becoming, from what other people have told me, less and less the norm, because jobs are kind of just mashing together. And something like a video editor, like what I do, is like I can use things like transcription tools, or like Script Sync is the Avid one. You can use these tools that are AI to do stuff that maybe somebody else would have done, and then I think it probably is going to affect people's experiences and their overall knowledge of the whole process if you're taking away these jobs that, although they might seem a bit boring, they are really important, and you should know how they work and you should know what they're for. Yeah,
Absolutely. So where do you see editing potentially going in, say, maybe 10 years from now? Because more and more AI agents are getting introduced that can actually do tasks for you. And I do wonder, and this all apply to like productions as well, but particularly in post, I see a future in which you can have a AI agent or operator sort of take control of your computer, and they'll know all the shortcuts. However, there's still an essential requirement for an editor to be communicating literally as we are now. You can have like the audio communication with GPT models and just talk to it and tell it to do a certain task. So it won't be as simple as, oh, just chop a little second off the front of this clip and the end of that one. I also think you'll need to be more in depth, which goes into, say, the organization of being an editor. Like the requirement to be organized is that you'll be then able to say, okay, can you grab clip number 13 and bring that onto the timeline? So it'll almost make it like a hands-free task potentially, which is very exciting, and it could potentially make the experience more enjoyable. I hope it actually, to some extent, you hope that it doesn't necessarily make it more accessible, because it is a valuable task that should still be seen as such, and it shouldn't become like a super easy thing to do. But yes, excited, also somewhat worried by the capabilities that seem to be evolving every week.
yeah.
So to end, I think jumping into very specific things, imagining potentially a university graduate is listening. What role, if you specialized in uni as an editor, what roles are potentially and opportunities are maybe available to you after graduating? A bit of a flex. is that I was recently asked to be a part of a future jobs panel at UWS
Oh,
with
nice. That's
Kelly
lovely.
and Esther from
Uh-huh.
Sirius
Okay, yeah. Uh-huh.
post-production house, and they knew who you were.
Yes. Yeah,
Um,
Esther, what's her second name?
Good question.
Is it Esther? I think if it's the Esther I'm thinking of, who works at, yeah, it's serious, yeah, she's lovely. I like her a lot, yeah. Yeah,
So they
cool.
came in as well and spoke
That's
about
funny.
the roles and opportunities within Sirius that are on offer to graduates. So how did you find that experience actually transitioning into the industry as a
Yeah.
full-time employee?
So it was really, really scary leaving uni and yeah, having to like, it almost felt like in uni the whole time, even though you're doing all this training and all this preparation, you can feel a bit like, but is this actually going to work in the real world for me? Like, am I actually going to succeed at this in the real world? And I feel like I doubted that until I got a job, like, because it's just, all you ever hear about is how competitive it is and how difficult it is and blah, blah, blah. So there's all these reasons that I was like doubting it. But you definitely have, like, there's so many opportunities. There's so many different things you can do. I used to find it frustrating that people said there was no direct route to becoming an editor, because I would be like, well, then what am I supposed to do? Do you know what I mean? I'd be like, I need like a guide. I need you to tell me like where I should go. But there are so many different ways. Personally, I looked up all of the, because I wanted to stay in Scotland. I looked up all of the companies in Scotland that I would maybe want. I like just went through them all, like all video production companies, everything, and went through them all and was like, which ones would I love to work for? And I just like got in contact with them all and emailed them, or called them, but mostly emailed them because I was too scared to call. And then people get in touch with you and people then like know your name, and that was how I got like my first and my second like actual jobs, like full-time jobs as an editor. So yeah, I think, but there's again, like there's a million different other ways you can do it. There's like internships, there's work experience programs, there's there's so many different things you could do. And I think the most important thing is just to not sort of confine yourself to one method of job hunting, and remember that there are different ways to do it. Like there are like, obviously apply to jobs on LinkedIn, apply to jobs on like Production Base and like all the places that like film and TV, like video jobs are advertised, like screen jobs are advertised. But remember that you can just like reach out to people and you can cold call, essentially, as long as you're not being like a pain in the arse or being like a nuisance, then you can do that. And it's so cheesy and horrible, but like because I hate networking, like the whole like formally, because I find it really just really like disingenuine and stuff. But that is still like important. Like maybe if you could do it like in an informal way, and hopefully if you've done like a degree, you're already like doing informal networking. Like everybody that was on your course is somebody that you could work with, and they might know people, and you know what I mean. So you can do it in a way that maybe isn't so like, I am networking. Like this is what I'm doing right now, where it feels more genuine and more like organic, and you're just meeting people that you get on with and that you know that you would probably like to work with. That's helpful too. I also personally, when I finished, I did my undergrad in film at Napier in Edinburgh Napier University, and I loved that, and it was 4 years. And then when I finished, I was really like not confident and felt like I wasn't ready, so I did a master's. And you definitely don't have to do a master's. Obviously, everybody says you don't even need a degree. You can just like go straight into work. But like for who I am as a person, I enjoy learning things in like an educational environment rather than learning everything on the job. Like I like to have like a base level of knowledge so that I feel confident that I can do what is required of me, and so that I can make like a good impression. So I wanted to do a master's for that reason, but again, I don't think it's something that you need to do. And so I did a master's in post-production, and then I found that so helpful, and found that just like made me feel so much more confident in using different types of software, like understanding more about like what editing is, understanding like the theory of editing, like, and then learning about stuff that like intimidated me before, like color grading or sound design or motion graphics and VFX. And now motion graphics and VFX, they're like my favorite two of my favourite things my two favourite things in post-production other than physical, like offline picture editing. And I wouldn't have found that out if I didn't go and do that degree that sort of opened all that up to me. So I think like that's another option. You can always like pursue further education. Screen Skills and NFTS and stuff, they all do short courses like all the time. So you can always do one of them too, and that's helpful to meet people. Yeah, but there's lots of different things you can do. And I think, yeah, the most important is being like proactive and contacting people and not just sort of sticking to like the designated routes, like knowing that you can just talk to people, and that's the way to get jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've heard this term a lot. Offline editing.
Yes.
What is it?
Okay, I shall tell you.
Is there offline editing and then online editing, or are those two different things?
Yeah, there sure is. Okay, so this is fun to talk about. So basically, and you'll know this as well, you know how lots of terminology in screen production is really outdated, and it's all based on film and like shooting film, editing film, and so stuff like roll and I can't remember, but like, you know, there's certain like terminology, like certain words that you use that looks like jargon that it doesn't actually make sense anymore because it's actually referencing like shooting on film. And so with offline and online, when you had film, you wouldn't cut the actual film that was shot in the camera, obviously, because that's all you've got. You would make copies of the film, and that would be offline. So this is like you're editing and you're cutting copies of this, literal physical copies of the film. You're chopping it up and putting it together. And that's not the film that was shot in the camera. That's a copy of that, a proxy, which we would use now, you know, for like in digital editing. And so when you're cutting it all, and then it's all offline. So then you can make like a million copies of your film. So if you cut something, you can then undo it and you can take the actual physical film and that cut won't be there anymore. And then online is the sound design and the color grading, and technically sound design because you're not actually doing anything to the film, but color grading and like effects and stuff, that's online because then that's on the original actual film that you shot, like the full resolution, full quality. So translating that to digital, we're cutting proxies. We're not cutting up the actual film clips that were in the cameras, mostly because that would take so much, it would just use too much RAM, and it's just huge, like to try and cut up like 4K video files. So you would make proxies of that, then you're cutting that are maybe like HD, maybe they're like 1080 or maybe they're like 720 or less, and then you would cut that. And then when you're going to color grade, you have to relink to the original 4K files, and then you would color grade the 4K files. So then that's online. That's the original media that you're using, not the offline.
When presenting yourself as an editor, that is your role. What are you then expected to do? For example, as you said, the offline editing is your responsibility. But when you identify as an editor, generally speaking, should you also be skilled in color grading, sound design, VFX, motion graphics, or are those all cherries on top?
Yeah, so in an ideal world, they are completely different skill sets again. So picture editing, that's editing, like that's telling the story, like putting it together, like cutting the film up, making a cut. That's its own individual skill set that's huge and massive. And then color grading is also its own individual skill set that is completely different, so complex, so intricate. It's a huge world, color grading. And I know you grade, so you'll know this. It's just like, it's completely its own thing. And then sound design is also completely its own thing that's absolutely massive and has its own skill set. So they really are all very, very different and very unique. And they are completely their own worlds. And people who have expertise in them have you can just say like, oh, I edit, and because I edit, I'm going to be good at color grading, or I'm going to be good at sound design, or I'm going to be good at VFX, because it's completely different. But unfortunately, these days, unfortunately, it might not be, because maybe it's been nice for me to get to try these different things, but definitely these days for short form content, you will be expected to do most, if not all of it. So in my working life, like when I have edited adverts, I do everything. So I do the sound design, I do the color grade, I do the motion graphics, I do the VFX, and I do the editing. And they all are kind of like, I spend like just as much time on all of them, even though I do consider myself like an editor, because I'm not trained in color grading in the way that a person who is an actual color grader is, or the same with sound design. But yeah, you would kind of be expected to do all of it if you're doing any sort of short form stuff. And then also it can help if for creative projects, if you are like how lots of people who shoot also grade, like lots of people who shoot like who are DOPs, they'll grade it as well. That's probably helpful because they're thinking about it from the same perspective about what they want it to look like at the end. But so for me, it's like maybe editing it is helpful because then I know what motion graphics I'm going to use, and I know what sound design I'm going to use, and I know how I'm going to colour it. So that can sort of like all work pretty well together just from me. But again, it's not going to be as good as if I handed it over to somebody who is a colour grader, who is a sound designer, or who is a VFX artist, and that's, you know, the thing that they are really focused on, and it is their primary mode of like telling stories and their primary art form or whatever. It would be better if someone else could do that bit because the end product would be better. But yeah, if you're just starting out, it's beneficial if you want to have like a job that pays money to know all of it, or at least know a little bit of all of it.
Yeah. And you said that you weren't formally educated, say, on color grading. So how did you learn that?
So I was formally educated in the sense that it was part of my post-production course, but we were really told that it is just an introduction. It's just understanding how to get started with it. Because like color graded gets so confusing where it becomes like more about like maths and like understanding like color scopes. Do you know what I mean? And that's something that I don't know because it's too in depth, or not too in depth, but it's more in depth than I've went. So I'm lucky that I've had like the introduction to like theoretically, I have like a basic understanding of color grading. In terms of using like software like DaVinci Resolve, I have a basic understanding of how to use it. So I could do it, but it's not going to be as like informed as somebody who like they've devoted their career to color grading. They research color grading. They color grade things in their spare time. They totally understand it. Like it's what they've focused on. They've written about it if they did it at uni or whatever. So yeah, I wouldn't compare like my education to like an actual color grader's education or experience of it. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And does that go for the same with VFX and motion graphics? Did you get a sort of introductory and also say YouTube, do you use any other educational platforms? Because there's so much of my course. I only spent 2 years at uni. I did a 2-2 from NESCO into UWS. Mm-hmm. But there really is a claim to make that I probably learned just as much, if not more, about the practical side of making videos or filmmaking from YouTube and books than I did actually going and doing a degree in it.
I think that's really, really valid because I've definitely learned so much from like YouTube tutorials. I think maybe where the formal education comes into is that gave me like an understanding of like what to look for. Do you know? So then I could be like, okay, well now I need to search, like I know that I'm using After Effects. So I can like search on YouTube After Effects tutorial how to use this, and I know like the kind of tools that are available within After Effects. So I can look up tutorials on different ways that people have used those tools that I wouldn't have gotten. Like it's too big, there's no way you could ever learn everything that you could do with motion graphics because it's just quite infinite, you know, because people are always going to be coming up with new ideas. And unlike color grading with motion graphics and VFX, there was like an introduction to that in my course. And then I really sort of delved deeper into that myself because I really like it. So I like love that. Like I have like a passion for motion graphics and VFX, mostly motion graphics. So then I went and I learned loads about that myself. So I'm definitely more knowledgeable with that than I am with like color grading or sound design. So yeah, I went and did my own sort of research in that, and I got my own experience in that because I do it a lot because I just enjoy it loads. But yeah, no, I use YouTube for that all the time. All the time. If I think like, if I have an idea and I'm like, oh, I wonder if like you could do this on After Effects, I don't really know how to do that, I like look up tutorials, and then you can maybe look at like 3 or 4 tutorials and then like combine them to be like the thing that you want, or just take the parts that you like from it. So yeah, I think that's YouTube's like a really valid learning tool for software.
Yeah. And I think also the key takeaway there is that you got all these introductions to various parts of editing and the sort of subheadings of editing, and you found one that you sort of naturally gravitated towards and dedicated your time to that. Because
Yeah.
as much as there is an argument to delve into color grading, if after doing it a couple of times you're like,
Yeah.
I'm not passionate about pursuing this anymore,
Yeah.
then there's probably an argument to be made that it's your time could probably be better spent focusing on something that you're naturally passionate about, that you actually see yourself spending a lot of your life doing, because then
Yeah.
ultimately you'll get a job potentially where it, the work you're doing doesn't feel like work. It feels like you're just doing something you love to do.
Yeah. And isn't that like the goal?
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
know?
So how many editing softwares have you put time into? Also, is there one for people entering the industry looking to get their first editing job that they should be specializing in? For example, myself, I use DaVinci Resolve almost exclusively. Obviously, you've got CapCut now, which is great for certain circumstances. Adobe is still probably the most popular, but also the most expensive. And then you've got Avid Media Composer, which is it still the industry standard? When I was learning it, it was,
Yeah.
despite it feeling very frustrating and old fashioned at times, where it's like your mouse is useless. You can't just drag and drop anything. There's a
No.
shortcut to, do anything.
Yeah.
So what would your recommendation be? Would it be focus on Adobe or just start anywhere?
So it really depends on what you're wanting to edit, like what content you're wanting to edit, where you're wanting to go. If you're wanting to go into film and TV, then 100% Avid, like you've got to know Avid. Like some stuff is maybe cut on Premiere sometimes, but mostly it's Avid. Then if you're doing short form, like all the ads that I do, they're all edited on Premiere Pro. And that's because, like we were saying with short form, I'm going to be doing probably the color grade, the sound design, the motion graphics as well. And if I'm using Premiere Pro, it's really easy for me to then like move between Premiere Pro and After Effects because it's all owned by Adobe. So it's like the workflow makes a lot more sense. Whereas if you're editing film or television, you're going to be working, no, it's not just going to be you. You're not going to be doing the color grade. You're not going to be doing the sound design. Do you know what I mean? You're going to be editing, and you're going to be also working with lots of different people and having to pass those projects on, like turning them over to sound design, to the grade, and delivering them to different people. And Avid is still the best media, or still the best software, sorry, for that. Premiere can't really do that as well. And also it's probably not just you editing it too. You'll be working with lots of different editors. You'll be working like within a department, and you all need to be able to share your project. And that's, again, like something that only really Avid can do. Premiere had like a beta, I can't remember what it was called, but they had like a move towards that, like to try and be more of a collaborative software. But I know that it wasn't perfect. So maybe eventually, once they get that, if they move towards that, then maybe Premiere will become more industry standard. But I don't really think so. It's definitely not right now. And the reason it's so, because Avid is like infuriating and it's so anti-intuitive and it feels really like messy. And it's just because it's the oldest, it's the most like tried and true software. So every time there's an update, think about how much has been added to it and how much, like, you're updating on top of update on top of update. Like you're building on this software until it's like coming into like a TV show in like the 6th season. And you're like, what the fuck is going on? Because you're like, no, this software has evolved from like the 70s to now. So if you've not been involved with it the whole time, which like we weren't even alive, so we have no chance, you're not going to understand it completely, or it's going to take a little bit more time to understand what's going on and how it works. But yeah, no, it is like a headache.
Editing portfolio when you're applying for jobs, is that something you have?
Yeah. So I have like an aversion to show reels and to editing show reels, and it's so frustrating because you really need them and they are so beneficial, and I love it when I have one. But there's such a hard thing to like edit for yourself, is to like edit together a show reel to use as a portfolio, because you're so judgmental about like your own work. But I know that when I do finally have one, I'm so happy with it, and it's so useful to then apply to jobs and show people what you've done. So yeah, I think having a portfolio is really, really helpful. Most people, if you're a video editor or just an editor, and I assume this is the same for like other departments, they won't just trust you saying that you know what you're doing. They want to see what work you've created so that they know. They're like, okay, well, there is evidence that you can do this because you've done this other thing that's like this. So I think that it's usually probably the most important thing is your portfolio.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then to end,
yes.
What is one piece of advice that you wish you could tell yourself when you were graduating uni? And this can be practical goal or an after effects, or it can be more so from a mindset. How should you be approaching things? As you said, networking. It's cringy. No one likes it.
Yeah, it's hard.
Maybe it's imposter syndrome. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so one big piece of advice would be to keep up relationships with people that you've met or worked with and not let it sort of go to the wayside, because I'm in in a position now where, because I've been working in corporate and commercial content for 4 years, that I've lost a lot of communication with people who make a lot of short films or who make like fun, more like creative artistic projects, and that's stuff that I really enjoy and that makes me really happy. And so I don't have a lot of access to that world anymore, even though I did 5 years of uni with all these really creative people who are out there making really fun, cool, exciting stuff that I would love to be a part of. I don't have as much access to that. So right now I'm in the process of I'm trying to remind people that I exist and be like, hello, we worked on this short film in 2020 and I'm still here and I would love to do more of that. So I'd say maybe keep up a variety in your work so you don't get stuck in one area and you lose your confidence in other areas, or you lose you sort of forget some of your experience and stuff in other areas. So make sure you keep up a variety of work, and also keep in touch with people that you enjoy working with. So that's probably my biggest advice.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about building your personal brand?
Oh my God.
I know this is I think it's a bad rap, honestly. It's just bloody posting. That's all it is. It's just using social media to continue to be at the forefront of people's minds. When they think videographer, they think Jack Darrow. That's kind of the whole game. Less so you don't need to go on a course, just start bloody posting. And if some content people clearly don't gravitate towards, then try something else. I really think when people are starting out, it's not that complicated. But is that something you've ever considered doing, making sort of personal content to, or is that just not really your
No, it totally is, because I mean it is something that I think about and I consider, and I just think that naturally I'm not very good at it, because it is a hard, there's people who study marketing and who people who are paid to create brands for people's businesses, because it is difficult and it takes a lot. I'm sure you'll know that as well. It's hard, or it can be hard, but I think for me, it's something that doesn't come naturally to me. So when I do it, I really am trying really, really hard. And that's been part of me trying to remind people that I exist. Is, I don't know if you've noticed, but on Instagram I've hardly posted anything, but I'm I need to post stuff and make it maybe a little bit more personal, even if it's still about editing, but not just being this Instagram page could have been managed by a robot and I'm just posting the latest project that I've worked on, and trying to be no, I'm Molly and I'm a person that you could work with, and this is what my personality is like, and maybe you would like that, and maybe we would get on and it would be good if we worked together. So that's kind of what I think Instagram is good for, and I am trying to use it for that purpose because I think it's really beneficial. It's just a bit tricky. But have you been working a lot on that?
Yeah, I'm more of a LinkedIn kind of guy.
You're more of a LinkedIn guy.
Yeah, I think similarly, as you said, I'm no marketer. There's people far better at this kind of thing than I am. But I do think it's already a lot of effort. So just focus on the one platform that aligns with your goals the most.
That makes sense.
And for me, LinkedIn I kind of prefer the clientele that I get through LinkedIn. Just being that, yes, it's maybe not the most creative work, but it's usually often actually a bit more relaxed and less complicated, and usually better paid as well.
That's good. That's important.
Meanwhile, on Instagram, you get a lot of inquiries, but then maybe the inquiries will be quite different, or the budgets will be lower.
It's true.
And also it will be maybe someone that has a side hustle opposed to they're the head of marketing at a bigger company.
Yeah.
It'll be someone who has a side hustle, never really done this before, kind of treating it like Fiverr, so they want you to do it for £35.
That's very true.
There's just, there's a lot of pros and cons to both. I'm more of a LinkedIn guy. I also think LinkedIn, it gets a bad rap for a good reason. It's a very stressful landscape to be a part of. But I think there's a massive space for people that are just trying to be normal human beings. You're not trying to be a stat sheet stuffer. You're not trying to be like, I got, 125 grand this month from spending 2 hours working on my website. Shut up.
I know. I hate that.
It's like it's infuriating.
It is.
I know that is the majority of LinkedIn. I understand it. And I've also been guilty of doing this sort of put your professional voice on because you're on LinkedIn. I'm trying more and more to move away from that.
And be more
I think
like
my
yourself.
advice with personal branding stuff, as well as creativity in general, when you're sharing it, is my expectation was that my friends were going to take the piss out of me, rightfully so.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a bit embarrassing. And people do but then it's like it's jabs that I also think are funny. Like people are like, yeah, why do you talk like that on LinkedIn? It's like, also that is a good point. It is, why am I speaking differently on LinkedIn? Just speak like a normal human being.
Yeah.
But you don't actually get as ribbed as you probably think. And if you do, your friends probably just aren't very nice. So
you'll
get some nicer friends that are just like supportive of like, I see what you're doing. You're playing the game, and that's cool.
Yeah, get some supportive pals that want you to do well.
Yeah, because there's something. It takes a degree of courage to put yourself out there.
I think it takes like a huge amount of courage. I think it's terrifying, and it is so silly. It's like I feel like that's like more internal, like emotional work that you have to do to be like, I'm just trying to do something for me, and it will help me like get closer to the way I want my life to be, like to get more work or more of this type of work. But I'm not going to do it because I'm scared that somebody's going to make fun of me. So it is scary, but it's something that I think that it's a right thing to work on. It's something that you should work on and try and overcome, because you shouldn't let that prevent you from doing the thing that you want to do. So no, I think it's very brave. I do, and I struggle with it. Like I'm still in the process of like trying to be like, I don't know how to talk to people on Instagram through like my work Instagram, because I'm like, how do you come across as professional? But then like when I'm in actual offices or I'm like in a job interview, I find it really easy to talk to somebody and be like, I'm still me, but I'm like a professional version of me. I'm like a trustworthy version of me, or do you know what I mean? Or I'm like somebody that you would want to work with, but I'm still me. I'm not like somebody else. So it's maybe just a bit of like a journey trying to figure out how to express that on text, like through Instagram, through LinkedIn as well.
Yeah. I think ultimately the final point on the note of how people are going to judge what you do, it's like, it's not your task to like, it's their task. You just do you and be as nice as you always are. And it's their decision whether or not they like it or they don't like it. And also if they think it warrants having the piss taken out of it or not. That's totally out with your control. And I think that's realizing that that's their choice. If they want to do that, they can do that. And if you really want to, you can block them. Problem solved.
No, it's true. It's nice. It's a nice thing to work on. It's also probably good at helping you be more like confident in like expressing yourself.
Nice. I think that's a perfect way to end this week's episode of the Not A Scooby podcast. So Molly, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that, just talking about editing and talking about cattle. It was really fun.